Blood stained Bethany Harlow's fingers as she washed the linens in the creek behind the boarding house, scrubbing fiercely at the evidence of another brutal night. The Wyoming Territory sun beat down mercilessly on her bent head, but she didn't notice the heat. Nothing external could match the burning rage and despair that had been her constant companions for the past 2 years. It was 1878, and Bethany had long since given up on the dream that had brought her west from Boston after the death of her parents. No proper teaching position awaited her in Timber Creek as promised. Only Jerome Wilkes, the saloon owner who'd paid for her passage with expectations she'd refused to fulfill. The boarding house had been her compromise, and her prison cooking, cleaning, and tending to travelers who passed through the dusty settlement that barely qualified as a town. "Need some help with those, madam." The deep voice startled her, sending water splashing across her already soaked apron. Bethany didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the stranger. Experience had taught her that silence was safer than speech, especially with men. Boot steps crunched on the rocky creek bank, coming closer. "Pardon my intrusion," just looked like a heavy load for one person. Still, she kept her head down, wringing out the sheet with trembling hands. Most men gave up when she didn't respond, moving on to easier targets for their attentions. This one lingered but kept a respectful distance. "Water's running clear today, been muddy since that storm last week." After a moment of awkward silence, he sighed. "All right then. Good day to you, madam." The footsteps retreated, and Bethany finally risked a glance over her shoulder. Tall and broad-shouldered, the stranger wore a dust-covered duster over practical trail clothes. A battered hat shaded his features, but she caught a glimpse of a strong jaw covered in several days' growth of beard. His spurs jingled softly as he led his horse back toward town. That night, Bethany served dinner to the boarding house guests, moving silently through the dining room as she placed plates before the 6 travelers staying under their roof. Mrs. Tilson, the aging widow who owned the establishment, handled the conversation, asking about journeys and destinations while Bethany tried to remain invisible. "Best meal I've had in weeks," said a familiar, deep voice. Bethany nearly dropped the coffee pot when she saw him, the man from the creek, seated at the far end of the table. Up close, she could see his eyes were a striking blue-gray, like the sky before a storm. "The cook deserves my compliments," Mrs. Tilson beamed. That would be Bethany. "She's a marvel in the kitchen, though she's modest about it." Those eyes found hers, and Bethany quickly looked away, focusing on pouring coffee without spilling. "I'm Vincent Reeves," he said, speaking directly to her despite her averted gaze. "I'll be staying a few days, Mrs. Tilson filled the silence Bethany left. "Mr. Reeves is moving cattle up from Texas, taking a rest before the final stretch to Montana." Bethany nodded once, acknowledging the information without engaging. She finished serving and retreated to the kitchen, where she could breathe again. Through the thin walls, she heard the continued conversation, the deep rumble of Vincent Reeves' voice standing out among the others. "She doesn't talk much, that one," one of the other guests commented. "Bethany has her reasons," Mrs. Tilson replied firmly, "and we respect them in this house." The next morning, Bethany rose before dawn as always, stoking the kitchen fire and beginning breakfast preparations. The back door creaked open while she was kneading dough, and she whirled around, clutching the knife she always kept within reach. Vincent Reeves stood in the doorway, hands raised placatingly. "Just bringing in some firewood. Noticed your pile was getting low." Bethany slowly lowered the knife, nodding once in acknowledgement. "Don't mind me," he said, moving to stack the split logs beside the stove. "Early riser. Can't seem to break the habit even when I'm not on the trail." He worked quietly, efficiently, not pressing her for conversation. When he finished, he simply tipped his hat and left. Bethany found herself staring at the door long after he'd gone, perplexed by his behavior. Men in her experience demanded attention, conversation, gratitude. They didn't simply offer help and expect nothing in return. Over the next 3 days, Vincent Reeves became a quiet presence around the boarding house. He fixed the loose porch railing that had been wobbling for months. He carried water from the well when he saw Bethany struggling with the heavy buckets. Each time he spoke little, never pushing her to respond. On the 4th morning, Bethany was hanging laundry when Jerome Wilkes appeared, his bulky frame casting a shadow over her work. Her hands froze on the damp sheet. "Been watching you, Bethany," he said, his voice slick as oil. "Still playing the silent game, I see. How long you think you can keep that up?" She kept her eyes down, heart hammering. After 2 years, she should be used to his periodic visits, his reminders of what he considered her debt to him. But the fear never diminished. "Your contract with me ain't done," he continued, stepping closer. "Mrs. Tilson's arrangement only lasts as long as I say it does." His meaty hand reached for her arm, and Bethany flinched. "Everything all right here?" Vincent Reeves materialized from around the corner of the house, his expression neutral but his stance anything but casual. Wilkes' hand dropped. "Private conversation, Cowboy. Move along, madam." Vincent addressed Bethany directly. "You need assistance." For the first time in nearly 2 years, Bethany spoke aloud to a stranger. "Yes." The word emerged as barely more than a whisper, her voice rusty from disuse. Something shifted in Vincent's eyes, surprise, followed by determination. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Bethany and Wilkes. "The lady seems to want you to leave," he said evenly. Wilkes sneered. "She works for me, contract says so. Interesting. Mrs. Tilson was under the impression she employed Bethany. Temporary arrangement." Wilkes straightened, trying to use his bulk to intimidate. "I paid for her passage west. She owes me." "How much?" Vincent asked. The question caught both Bethany and Wilkes off guard. "What? How much does she owe? I'll pay it right now," Wilkes laughed. "It ain't about money anymore." "Everything's about money," Vincent countered. "Name your price." A tense silence followed as Wilkes assessed the cowboy. Finally, he named a sum that made Bethany's stomach sink, far more than her passage had cost, an impossible amount. Without hesitation, Vincent reached into his vest and pulled out a money clip. He counted out bills, handed them to Wilkes. "Consider her debt paid in full." Wilkes stared at the money, then at Vincent. "You're a fool, Cowboy. Not the first time I've been called that." Vincent's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "We're done here." After another long moment, Wilkes pocketed the money with a shrug. "Your loss." He gave Bethany a final, unsettling look. Damaged goods, anyway. When he was gone, Bethany's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the laundry line for support. "You all right?" Vincent asked, keeping his distance. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. The enormity of what had just happened overwhelmed her. "You don't owe me anything," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "That man had no right to hold you to any contract." Bethany found her voice again, though it was barely audible. "Why?" Vincent considered her question seriously. "Some things just ain't right, that's all." He tipped his hat. "I'll leave you to your work." That night, Bethany couldn't sleep. The weight of the debt Vincent had paid a small fortune to someone like her pressed on her conscience. After tossing and turning for hours, she slipped from her small room at the back of the boarding house and made her way to the kitchen. She lit a single lamp and began mixing ingredients for sourdough biscuits. Vincent had mentioned they were his favorite. It was a pitiful repayment, but it was all she had to offer. Couldn't sleep either. She jumped at Vincent's voice, nearly dropping the bowl. He stood in the doorway to the dining room, hair tousled from sleep, wearing a simple shirt and trousers. "I'm sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." Bethany gestured to the bowl, then pointed at him. He smiled slightly. "For me, that's kind but unnecessary." She shook her head firmly, continuing to mix the dough. "All right then." He settled at the kitchen table. "Mind if I keep you company?" She shrugged, which he seemed to take as permission. For several minutes, they existed in surprisingly comfortable silence, Bethany working, Vincent watching the lamplight play across the kitchen. "I have nightmares," he said eventually. "That's why I don't sleep much. War does that to a man." Bethany glanced at him, noting the faraway look in his eyes. "Confederate cavalry, joined up when I was just 16, too young to know better." He rubbed a hand over his beard. "Seen things no person should see." His honesty stirred something in Bethany. Setting down the bowl, she wiped her hands on her apron and pulled a chair opposite him. Taking a deep breath, she spoke. "I was a teacher," she said, her voice thin and halting. "In Boston." Vincent remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might silence her again. "My parents died. Influenza. I had no family, no prospects." The words came slowly, painfully. Advertisement in the newspaper, teaching position in Wyoming Territory, passage paid, understanding darkened his features. Wilkes, she nodded. When I arrived, there was no school, no position. Her hands trembled in her lap. He expected other services, you refused. I fought. Her voice strengthened with the memory of her defiance. He beat me, but Mrs. Tilson intervened, offered to let me work here to pay my debt to him. He agreed, but never let me forget. Vincent's hands clenched on the table, but his voice remained gentle. How long? 2 years. And you stopped speaking, Bethany looked down. Words were used against me. Silence was safer. They sat quietly for a long moment, the confession hanging between them. Thank you, Vincent finally said, for telling me. Bethany met his eyes, finding no pity there, only respect and understanding. Something long frozen inside her began to thaw. I'm leaving for Montana in 2 days, he said. My partner's waiting with the herd north of here. She nodded, ignoring the unexpected pang of disappointment. Would you consider coming with me? The question shocked her into stillness. Not as, I mean. For the first time, he seemed flustered. There's a town called Riverspend, growing place. They need a teacher, real one this time. Why? She whispered. Because you deserve a fresh start, and because I've never met anyone as strong as you. His gaze was steady, honest. 2 years of what you endured would break most people, but here you are, still standing, still fighting. Tears welled in Bethany's eyes. No one had seen strength in her silence before, only brokenness. Think about it, he said, rising from the table. No pressure, and if you say no, I'll understand. After he left, Bethany sat alone in the kitchen until dawn, the half-mixed biscuit dough forgotten beside her. The next day passed in a blur as Bethany weighed her options. Stay in the relative safety of Mrs. Tilson's boarding house, where at least she knew what to expect. Or venture into the unknown with a man she barely knew, on nothing more than his word that a teaching position awaited, Mrs. Tilson found her in the garden that afternoon, kneeling among the vegetables. He's a good man, that Vincent Reeves, the older woman said without preamble. I've been running this place for 30 years. I know the measure of a man when I see one. Bethany looked up, squinting against the sun. You're thinking of going with him. It wasn't a question. Bethany nodded hesitantly. Mrs. Tilson lowered herself onto a nearby bench with a sigh. Good, you should. Surprise must have shown on Bethany's face because Mrs. Tilson chuckled. Did you think I wanted to keep you here forever? Cooking and cleaning when you should be teaching. She shook her head. I took you in because you needed protection, but that man can protect you better than I can now, and he's offering you your dream back. Scared, Bethany admitted softly. Of course you are, only a fool wouldn't be, Mrs. Tilson's weathered hand covered Bethany's. But staying scared is no way to live, child. That evening, Bethany approached Vincent as he sat alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Beautiful, isn't it? He said as she settled on the step below him. Yes, she gathered her courage. I'll go to Montana. His smile was slow and genuine. You won't regret it, Bethany, I promise you that. I can't pay you back, not for a long time. There's nothing to pay back. Consider it an investment in a school teacher. His voice softened. No strings attached. If you get to Riverspend and want nothing more to do with me, that's your choice. The concept of choice, real choice, was still foreign to Bethany after so long without it. She nodded, overwhelmed by both gratitude and apprehension. They departed the next morning at dawn. Mrs. Tilson pressed a small bundle of food and a newer dress into Bethany's hands, along with a fierce hug. Write to me when you're settled, she ordered. Let me know you're all right. Vincent had arranged for a sturdy mare for Bethany to ride, with gentle manners and an easy gait. Her name's Daisy, he told her. She'll treat you right if you do the same for her. The first day's ride was quiet. Vincent didn't press Bethany for conversation, seeming content to point out interesting landmarks or share brief stories about his cattle drives. By midday, they had left Timber Creek far behind, following a trail that wound through rolling hills covered in late summer grasses. They made camp near a small stream just before sunset. Vincent efficiently set up a simple camp, building a fire and preparing a meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. Bethany watched his practiced movements, the ease with which he navigated the wilderness. Been on the trail most of my life, he explained when he caught her observing him. After the war couldn't settle in one place, too restless. He handed her a tin plate of food. This drive to Montana's my last one, though. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Time to put down roots. Got some land outside Riverspend, building a ranch. He sipped his coffee. Cattle's good business up there. Growing town means steady market. As darkness fell completely, the vastness of the open country surrounded them. Bethany gazed up at the brilliant canopy of stars, more than she'd ever seen in Boston or even Timber Creek. Never gets old, Vincent said, following her gaze. Makes a person feel small and big all at once, don't it? Bethany nodded, finding no words adequate to express the feeling. After they ate, Vincent spread his bedroll on one side of the fire and Bethany's a respectable distance away on the other side. I'll keep watch for a while, he told her. Get some rest. Despite her exhaustion from the day's ride, sleep eluded Bethany. The unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness coyotes calling in the distance, the rustle of night creatures in the grass, the soft nickering of the horses kept her alert and wary. Can't sleep? Vincent asked softly after she had tossed and turned for nearly an hour. No. First night on the trail's always the hardest. He stoked the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. Want to hear a story? Might help pass the time. When she nodded, he began telling her about his first cattle drive at 17, just after the war. His deep voice wove a tale of adventure and misadventure, of stampedes and river crossings and starlit nights much like this one. There was humor in his storytelling, and a gentle self-deprecation that put Bethany at ease. Somewhere in the midst of his tale of how his horse had dumped him in a mud hole in front of the entire outfit, Bethany drifted off to sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Vincent crouched by the fire, cooking breakfast as the first rays of dawn painted the eastern horizon. Morning, he greeted her. Sleep all right, she nodded, surprised to find it was true. She'd slept better under the open sky than she had in months at the boarding house. They continued their journey northward, settling into a comfortable routine. During the day, they rode side by side when the trail allowed it. Vincent would occasionally share observations about the land or stories of his travels, never pushing when Bethany remained silent. In the evenings, they would make camp, share a simple meal, and often Vincent would tell stories until sleep claimed them. On the third night, it rained. Vincent quickly erected a small canvas shelter, just big enough for the two of them to stay dry. Huddled beneath it, closer than they had been before, Bethany felt a strange tension in the air between them. Should clear by morning, Vincent said, his voice oddly tight as he carefully maintained the small space between them. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Bethany flinched involuntarily. Not fond of storms, he asked gently. She shook her head. Reminds me of. She trailed off, unable to finish. Of Wilkes, she nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. He can't hurt you anymore, Vincent said, his voice low and fierce. I'd die before I let that happen. The conviction in his words startled her. Why do you care so much? He was quiet for a long moment, rain drumming on the canvas above them. When I first saw you at the creek, you reminded me of someone, my sister, Caroline. Bethany watched his face in the dim light as he continued. She died during the war. Yankees came through our town while I was away fighting. He swallowed hard. She wasn't treated kindly. I'm sorry, Bethany whispered. After she stopped talking too, wouldn't say a word to anyone, then one morning she was just gone. Walked into the river. His voice broke slightly. I wasn't there to protect her, but I'm here now, and I protect what I care about. Without thinking, Bethany reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched a man since arriving in Wyoming. Vincent looked down at their hands, then back at her face, something unreadable in his expression. You should get some sleep, he said softly. I'll keep watch. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling in the early light. They packed up camp in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, a tentative trust. As they rode that day, Bethany found herself speaking more than she had in years, asking questions about Montana, about Riverspend, about the teaching position Vincent had mentioned. Each answer reinforced her decision to leave with him, to take this chance at a new beginning. Town's growing fast, he told her. Lots of families moving in. They've built a schoolhouse, but the last teacher left to get married. Children have been without proper schooling for months. How many students, she asked. Last I heard, about 20. Ages 6 to 16. He glanced at her. That sound manageable, she nodded, already mentally organizing lessons and schedules. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of genuine excitement about the future. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Vincent pulled something from his saddlebag. Got something for you. Picked it up in town before we left. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Bethany opened it carefully to reveal a book, a new edition of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Shopkeeper said it was popular with ladies, Vincent said, suddenly looking uncertain. If you don't like it. It's my favorite, Bethany interrupted, running her fingers over the embossed cover. How did you know? He smiled, relief evident in his expression. Lucky guess. Thought you might like something to read on the journey. That night, for the first time, Bethany read aloud to Vincent by the firelight, her voice growing stronger with each page. He listened intently, occasionally asking questions about the story or characters. In those hours, Bethany felt herself becoming the person she had been before the teacher, the educated woman with opinions and ideas to share. The next day brought them to the northern edge of Wyoming Territory. We'll cross into Montana tomorrow, Vincent told her as they made camp. Another 3 days to river spend after that. The closer they got to their destination, the more a strange anxiety began to build in Bethany's chest. What if the teaching position didn't work out? What if the people of Riverspend rejected her? What if Vincent, once his obligation was fulfilled, no longer wanted her company? That night she barely touched her food, too preoccupied with worry to eat. Something troubling you? Vincent asked, noticing her distraction. She hesitated, then decided on honesty. What if I fail as a teacher? You won't. You can't know that. I know you, he said simply. I've watched you these past days, the way you observe everything, how you think before you speak, how your eyes light up when you talk about books or learning. He leaned forward. You were born to teach, Bethany. Any fool can see that. His confidence in her was both touching and terrifying. And if you're wrong, then you try something else. Life's full of second chances if you're brave enough to take them. She thought about that for a long while after they'd turned in for the night. Vincent Reeves seemed to embody that philosophy, a Confederate soldier who'd remade himself as a cowboy, and now planned to become a rancher. Each transformation requiring courage, resilience, and hope, qualities she had once possessed herself, before Wilkes and Timber Creek had stripped them away. The next morning, they crossed the invisible line into Montana Territory. The landscape gradually changed, becoming more mountainous, with pine forests replacing the open grasslands of Wyoming. The air felt different, too crisper, carrying the scent of evergreens and wild herbs. Beautiful country, Vincent commented as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a vast valley. First time I came through here, I knew this was where I wanted to settle. Bethany could understand why. The vista before them was breathtaking, rolling hills giving way to rugged mountains in the distance, a river snaking through the valley floor, glinting silver in the sunlight. My land's about 10 miles east of Riverspend, he continued. Has a view not unlike this one. Creek running through it, good grazing land. There was pride in his voice. Built a cabin last fall, nothing fancy but it's solid, weather-tight. You built it yourself, he nodded. Had some help from my partner, Abe. He's with the herd now, probably cursing my name for leaving him with it so long. He chuckled. Abe's a good man, best trail cook you'll ever meet and handy with tools. As they continued their journey, Vincent shared more details about Riverspend, the general store run by a husband and wife from Philadelphia, the doctor who'd served in the Union Army, the small church where services were held every Sunday, the schoolhouse built just last year through a community effort. With each detail, the town became more real to Bethany, and her anxiety began to transform into cautious anticipation. They made camp that evening in a small clearing beside a stream. After dinner, Vincent surprised her by pulling a harmonica from his pocket. Mind if I play a bit? Helps me unwind. At her nod, he began a slow, gentle melody that drifted through the twilight air. Bethany watched his fingers move over the instrument, his eyes closed as he played. There was something deeply moving about this strong, capable man expressing himself through music. When he finished, she surprised herself by saying, "That was beautiful." He looked pleased. "My father taught me, said a man should have music in his life, keeps the soul from getting too hard." "Your father sounds wise." He was. Vincent's expression turned wistful. "Lost him and Ma both to typhoid when I was 14. That's partly why I joined up when the war came, had nothing keeping me home. The shared experience of orphanhood created another connection between them. I was 18 when my parents died," Bethany said softly. "It feels like being untethered, doesn't it? Set adrift." "Exactly that." He studied her face in the firelight. "Maybe that's why we recognize something in each other." The moment felt fragile, intimate. Bethany looked away first, suddenly aware of how much she'd come to care for this man in such a short time. "We should rest," she said. "Long day tomorrow." Vincent nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer before he set about banking the fire for the night. The next day brought challenges: a steep mountain pass to traverse, then a river crossing that had Bethany clutching Daisy's mane with white-knuckled hands as the mare swam strongly across the current. Vincent stayed close, his hand occasionally reaching out to steady her when the trail grew treacherous. By evening, they were both exhausted. They made a simple camp, too tired for much conversation. As Bethany was about to retire to her bedroll, Vincent touched her arm lightly. "You did well today," he said. "Most city folks would have balked at that crossing." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling it and moving forward anyway." His hand remained on her arm, warm through the fabric of her sleeve. "You're one of the bravest people I've ever known, Bethany." Their eyes met in the firelight, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the growing feelings neither had put into words. For a breathless moment, Bethany thought he might lean forward, might kiss her. Part of her wanted him to. Instead, he squeezed her arm gently and stepped back. "Sleep well." That night, Bethany dreamed of Vincent, of his hands, gentle on her skin, of his lips, warm against hers, of a life shared in that cabin he'd described, with views of mountains and a creek running nearby. She woke with the dawn, cheeks flushed with more than just the morning chill. Vincent was already up, preparing coffee. He greeted her with a smile that made her wonder if her dreams had somehow been visible on her face. "One more day to Riverspend," he said. "Should arrive by afternoon tomorrow." The news brought both excitement and a strange melancholy. Their journey together was coming to an end. Soon, Vincent would deliver her to the town, ensure she was settled in her teaching position, and then return to his ranch and his life. A life that, until now, hadn't included her. As they rode that day, Bethany found herself watching Vincent more closely, the confident way he sat his horse, the kind patience he showed when Daisy balked at a fallen log, the lines that appeared at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. She was mapping him in her memory, preparing for when he would no longer be beside her each day. They camped that night beside a small lake, the water reflecting the sunset in brilliant shades of orange and purple. After they'd eaten, Vincent suggested a walk along the shore. "Last night on the trail," he said as they strolled side by side. "Thought we might mark the occasion." The evening was mild, a gentle breeze rippling the lake's surface, crickets chirped in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled. "Will you be glad to reach town?" Vincent asked after they'd walked in silence for a while. Bethany considered the question. "Yes and no. I'm eager to see the school, to begin teaching again." She hesitated. "But I've enjoyed our journey, as have I." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "More than I expected to." The intensity in his gaze made her heart beat faster. "Vincent, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know you're still healing, still finding your way back to yourself." He ran a hand through his hair. "I just wanted you to know that whatever happens in Riverspend, I'm glad we met. Glad I was at the creek that day. So am I." The words felt inadequate for the depth of her gratitude for all he had done to change the course of her life. They stood in silence for a long moment, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. "We should head back," Vincent finally said. "Early start tomorrow." As they turned toward camp, Bethany impulsively reached for his hand. his fingers entwined with hers immediately, strong and warm. They walked back that way, hand in hand under the emerging stars, neither putting into words the shift that had occurred between them. That night, as Bethany lay in her bedroll listening to Vincent's steady breathing across the fire, she made a decision. Whatever awaited her in Riverspend, she would face it with the same courage she'd shown crossing that river. And somehow, she would find a way to keep Vincent Reeves in her life. They reached Riverspend shortly after midday the following day. The town was larger than Timber Creek, with several streets of wooden buildings, including a proper church with a steeple, a two-story hotel, and various businesses. People moved about with purpose, and Bethany noticed immediately that many were women and children families, not just the rough men who populated smaller frontier settlements. Main Street, Vincent said as they rode down the wide dirt road that formed the center of town. Schoolhouse is at the north end, near the church. Curious glances followed them as they passed. Bethany sat straighter in her saddle, suddenly self-conscious of her travel-worn appearance and dusty clothes. "Don't worry," Vincent said, noting her discomfort. "Folks here are good people." Not too quick to judge. They stopped first at a modest building with a sign proclaiming it the office of Mayor Thomas Whitaker. Vincent dismounted and helped Bethany down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "Mayor's expecting us," he explained. "He's the one who'll get you settled with the teaching position." Inside, they were greeted by a portly man with spectacles and a genial smile. "Vincent Reeves, good to see you, son, and this must be Miss Harlow." Vincent made the introductions, explaining briefly that Bethany was the teacher he'd written about from Wyoming. "Excellent, excellent," Mayor Whitaker said, pumping Bethany's hand enthusiastically. "We've been in desperate need of a qualified teacher. The children are running wild and their parents are at their wits' end." "Miss Harlow taught in Boston before coming west," Vincent said proudly. "Properly educated and experienced," the mayor beamed. "Perfect school term should start in 2 weeks. That'll give you time to settle in and prepare." He shuffled some papers on his desk. "We've arranged lodging for you with Mrs. Henderson, widow lady, very respectable. She has a spare room she rents to single ladies." Bethany glanced at Vincent, suddenly realizing they would be parting ways sooner than she'd expected. "I'll see Miss Harlow settled," Vincent said, as if reading her thoughts, "and I'd like to show her the schoolhouse before taking her to Mrs. Henderson's." The mayor nodded approvingly. Of course. "Stop by tomorrow, Miss Harlow, and we'll go over the particulars of your position, salary, expectations, and so forth." Outside again, Vincent helped Bethany back onto Daisy. "Let's see your school first," he suggested. "It's not far." The schoolhouse stood on a slight rise at the edge of town, a simple but sturdy wooden building with large windows and a small bell tower. Inside, rows of wooden desks faced a teacher's desk and blackboard. Bookshelves lined one wall, though they were sparsely filled. "What do you think?" Vincent asked as Bethany walked slowly around the room, running her fingers over the smooth desktop. "It's perfect," she said softly, envisioning the space filled with children, with learning and laughter. After 2 years of silence and servitude, the opportunity before her seemed almost too good to be true. Vincent watched her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Thought you'd approve." "How can I ever thank you enough?" she asked, turning to face him. "Seeing you here like this, that's thanks enough." He gestured around the schoolhouse. "This is where you belong, Bethany, doing what you were meant to do." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "And where do you belong, Vincent?" His expression softened. "I'm still figuring that out." The moment stretched between them, full of possibilities neither was ready to voice. Finally, Vincent cleared his throat. "We should get you to Mrs. Henderson's. You must be tired from the journey." Mrs. Henderson proved to be a kindly woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She welcomed Bethany warmly, showing her to a comfortable room at the back of her neat home. "Dinner's at 6, she informed Bethany, "but I imagine you and Mr. Reeves have matters to discuss first." With a knowing look that made Bethany blush, Mrs. Henderson tactfully withdrew, leaving them alone in the small parlor. "I should go," Vincent said after an awkward moment. "Need to check on Abe and the herd, make sure everything's on track." "Of course." Bethany tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. Your ranch. It's about an hour's ride from here, he hesitated. I'll be in town again in a few days once the cattle are settled. Maybe I could call on you then. Hope flickered in Bethany's chest. I'd like that. He reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. You're going to be fine here, Bethany. Better than fine. His thumb traced small circles on her skin, and if you need anything at all, you send word to me. I'll come. The promise in those words, in his touch, made her breath catch. I know you will. For a moment it seemed he might say more. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Until next time, then. Bethany watched from the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, taking a piece of her heart with him. The next days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Mayor Whitaker introduced Bethany to the town council and formally offered her the teaching position, with a salary that exceeded her expectations. Mrs. Henderson proved to be both a gracious landlady and a valuable source of information about the town and its inhabitants. Bethany visited the schoolhouse daily, cleaning and organizing, creating lesson plans, and familiarizing herself with the available books and materials. Word spread quickly that the new teacher had arrived, and curious parents began stopping by with their children, eager to meet the woman who would be educating them. To her surprise, Bethany found herself speaking more freely than she had in years. The people of Riverspend were welcoming and unpretentious, genuinely pleased to have a qualified teacher in their midst. You're a godsend, Mrs. Miller told her after bringing her twin boys to meet Bethany. These rascals need a firm hand and some book learning before they drive me to distraction. By the end of the first week, Bethany had met most of her future students and many of their parents. She'd attended a church social, had tea with several of the town's ladies, and begun to feel cautiously optimistic about her new life in Riverspend. But through it all, she watched for Vincent. Each day she found herself glancing toward the road that led out of town, hoping to see his familiar figure approaching. He'll come, Mrs. Henderson said on the 8th day, catching Bethany at the window again. Vincent Reeves is a man of his word. I know, Bethany replied, embarrassed to be so transparent in her longing. That man went to considerable trouble to bring you here, Mrs. Henderson continued, settling into her rocking chair with her knitting. Wrote letters to the mayor and council, sang your praises to anyone who would listen. This was news to Bethany. He did. Oh my, yes, quite determined you were exactly what Riverspend needed. The older woman's needles clicked rhythmically. And he wasn't wrong. You've made quite an impression already. Bethany sat across from her landlady, digesting this information. I didn't realize he'd planned it so carefully. Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled. Vincent may look like a rough cowboy, but he's got a sharp mind and a good heart. When he sets his mind to something, he sees it through. What else do you know about him? Bethany asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Been in these parts about 3 years, bought that land east of town, started building his ranch bit by bit, keeps to himself mostly but always willing to help when needed. Mrs. Henderson studied Bethany over her spectacles. Folks respect him. And if a man like Vincent Reeves thinks highly of you, well, that counts for something around here. The next morning, Bethany was arranging books on the schoolhouse shelves when she heard the door open behind her. Expecting another parent with children in tow, she turned with a welcoming smile that faltered when she saw who stood there. Vincent filled the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat nervous. He'd shaved his trail beard, and his clothes were clean and pressed clearly. He'd made an effort with his appearance. Vincent. His name came out as little more than a whisper. Bethany. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I hope I'm not interrupting your work. Not at all. She moved toward him, unable to stop the smile spreading across her face. I'm glad you're here. Relief softened his features. Had to finish moving the herd, get them settled on my land. He glanced around the schoolhouse. Place is looking good, you've been busy. There's much to do before classes begin. She hesitated, then asked the question foremost in her mind. How long will you be in town? Actually, I came to ask if you'd join me for dinner tonight. He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands, at the hotel restaurant. It's the finest eating establishment in Riverspend, though that's not saying much. "I'd love to," Bethany replied, her heart skipping at the formal invitation. His smile was worth every moment of waiting. "I'll call for you at 6 if that suits." When she nodded, he seemed to relax. "Good." "That's good," he cleared his throat. "I should let you get back to your work. I have some business at the Mercantile anyway." As he turned to leave, Bethany called after him. "Vincent," he paused, looking back. "I'm glad you came back." The warmth in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. "I promised I would." That evening, Bethany dressed with care in her best dress, the one Mrs. Tilson had given her before she left Timber Creek. It was a simple garment of blue calico, but far nicer than anything she'd worn in years. Mrs. Henderson helped her arrange her hair, pinning it up in a style more becoming than her usual severe bun. "You look lovely, dear," the older woman said approvingly. "That color brings out your eyes." When Vincent arrived promptly at 6, his reaction confirmed Mrs. Henderson's assessment. He stared at Bethany for a long moment before finding his voice. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The hotel restaurant was indeed the finest in Riverspend linen tablecloths, proper glassware, and a menu that offered more than the standard frontier fare. Vincent guided Bethany to a table by the window, where they could watch the sunset over the mountains while they ate. Conversation flowed more easily than Bethany had expected. Vincent told her about settling the cattle on his land, about the improvements he planned for the ranch house, about his hopes for building a successful operation over the coming years. In turn, Bethany shared her progress with the school preparations, her impressions of the town and its people, her excitement about returning to teaching. "You seem different," Vincent observed as they finished their dessert, a surprisingly good apple pie. "More yourself, somehow." Bethany considered this. "I feel different, more like the person I was before." She didn't need to finish the thought. "I'm glad," he said softly. "You deserve happiness, Bethany." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. "So do you, Vincent." As they walked back to Mrs. Henderson's in the gathering twilight, Vincent offered Bethany his arm. She took it without hesitation, relishing the solid strength of him beside her. "Would you like to see my ranch sometime?" he asked as they approached her lodgings. "It's not much yet, but—" He trailed off, seeming suddenly unsure. "I'd like that very much," she replied. They stopped at Mrs. Henderson's gate. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the parlor window, the older woman's tactful way of giving them privacy while still maintaining proprieties. "Bethany," Vincent began, turning to face her. "These past days without you have been difficult. I've grown accustomed to your company." Her heart quickened at his words. "I've missed you too." He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I know it's soon, too soon perhaps. But I need you to know that my feelings for you go beyond friendship." The confession, though hoped for, still took her breath away. "Vincent, you don't need to say anything now," he interrupted. "I understand if you need time." "After what you've been through, I wouldn't expect." Bethany silenced him in the most effective way possible by rising on her tiptoes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was brief, chaste, but the connection it forged between them was profound. When she pulled back, Vincent looked stunned. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "Well," he said softly, "that's certainly clearer than words. I've never been good at hiding my feelings," Bethany admitted. "Even during my silent years, Mrs. Tilson always said my face gave me away." Vincent raised a hand to her cheek, his touch reverent. "May I?" At her nod, he lowered his head and kissed her properly, a tender, unhurried exploration that left her breathless and yearning for more. Unlike the few forced kisses she'd endured in the past, this one awakened something within her, a hunger she hadn't known she possessed. When they finally parted, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he murmured, though he made no move to release her. "You should," she agreed, equally reluctant to end the moment. With visible effort, Vincent stepped back. "I have to return to the ranch tonight, got cattle to tend to, but I'll be back in town the day after tomorrow." His eyes searched hers. "Will you ride out to the ranch with me then? I could show you the place, maybe have a picnic lunch." "That sounds wonderful." One more kiss, brief but full of promise, and then he was gone, walking backward down the path so he could keep his eyes on her until the last possible moment. Inside Mrs. Henderson pretended to be absorbed in her Bible reading, though the knowing smile on her face suggested she was well aware of what had transpired on her doorstep. "Had a nice evening, dear?" she asked innocently. "Lovely," Bethany replied, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "Mr. Reeves seemed in good spirits when he called for you." "Did he?" Mrs. Henderson set aside her Bible. "You know, in all the time Vincent Reeves has been in these parts, I've never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you." Bethany felt her cheeks warm. "And how is that?" "Like you're the sunrise after the longest night." The older woman's expression softened. "It's a rare thing, that kind of regard, not to be taken lightly." "I don't," Bethany assured her. "Not for a moment." True to his word, Vincent returned to town 2 days later. He arrived at Mrs. Henderson's mid-morning, riding his own horse and leading a gentle mare for Bethany. "Not Daisy," Bethany observed as he helped her mount. "No, this is Willow. Daisy's getting a well-deserved rest at the ranch." He adjusted the stirrups for her. "Willow's even more sure-footed, good for the trail to my place." The ride took just over an hour, following a winding path through pine forests and open meadows. As they crested a final ridge, Vincent reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. Bethany caught her breath at the view. A small cabin nestled against a backdrop of towering pines, with a creek winding through a meadow dotted with wildflowers. In the distance, cattle grazed on lush grass, and the mountains rose majestically against the blue sky. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning it. The setting was idyllic, the kind of place poets wrote about. Pride evident in his voice, Vincent pointed out various features of his property: the natural spring that never ran dry, the south-facing slope where he planned to plant an orchard, the partially constructed barn where a tall, dark-skinned man was working. "That's Abe," Vincent explained. "My partner in the cattle business and the best friend a man could ask for." As they approached the cabin, Abe set down his tools and came to greet them. He was an imposing figure, well over 6 feet tall, with powerful shoulders and hands that looked capable of bending iron. But his smile was warm as Vincent introduced him to Bethany. "Pleased to finally meet you, Miss Harlow," Abe said, his deep voice carrying a slight accent Bethany couldn't quite place. "Vincent hasn't stopped talking about you since he got back." Vincent shot his friend a warning look, which Abe ignored completely. "Had to listen to him go on about your intelligence, your courage, your beauty." Abe winked at Bethany. "Nearly drove me to distraction during the cattle move." "Don't you have work to do?" Vincent asked pointedly. Abe laughed. "Indeed I do. Pleasure meeting you, Miss Harlow. Hope to see more of you around here." With a knowing grin at Vincent, he returned to the barn. "Sorry about that," Vincent said as he helped Bethany dismount. "Abe lacks certain social graces." "I like him," Bethany replied, smiling at Vincent's discomfort, "and I'm flattered you spoke of me." "Spoke" is a mild term for it, apparently. Vincent took her hand. "Let me show you the cabin." The structure was simple but solidly built: one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to what Bethany presumed were bedrooms. "It's not much," Vincent said, watching her reaction closely. "But it's weather-tight and warm in winter. I have plans to expand it eventually." "It's perfect," Bethany said, running her hand along the smooth-planed pine table. "You built this yourself?" "Abe and I did, yes, last fall and winter." He moved to stand beside her. "What do you think, honestly?" She turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his confident exterior. "I think it's a wonderful home, Vincent, one any woman would be proud to share." His eyes darkened at her words. "Is that something you might consider someday?" The directness of the question startled her, but in a good way. "I might," she said softly, "if asked properly." A slow smile spread across his face. "Duly noted." They spent the afternoon exploring the property. Vincent showed her the creek where trout darted in the clear water, the stand of aspens where morel mushrooms grew in spring, the ridge where he often sat to watch the sunset. Everywhere they went, he spoke of future plans, improvements, expansions, dreams. And in every description, Bethany noticed, he used we rather than I. They ate their picnic lunch in a meadow filled with late summer wildflowers. Afterward, they sat side by side, watching clouds drift across the vast Montana sky. I never thought I'd find this, Vincent said after a comfortable silence. Find what? Peace. He looked at her, his expression open and vulnerable. After the war, I thought that part of me was dead, too much blood, too much loss. He picked a wildflower, twirling it between his fingers. Riding the trail helped being alone with the sky and the land, but there was always something missing. Bethany waited, sensing he needed to find his own words. Then I found this place, he continued. Started building something that was mine. Something good to balance all the destruction I'd been part of. He reached for her hand. And then I found you, or you found me, and suddenly the picture was complete. Tears pricked at Bethany's eyes. Vincent, I know it's fast, he said quickly. Too fast, maybe. We've known each other, 3 weeks? It's not reasonable to feel this way so soon. And yet here we are, she said softly. He nodded, relief evident in his expression. Here we are. When he kissed her this time, there was a new urgency to it, a hunger that matched her own. His hands cupped her face with exquisite tenderness, even as his lips demanded more than gentle exploration. Bethany responded in kind, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. It was Vincent who finally broke the kiss, his breathing unsteady. We should head back, he said, though his eyes told a different story. Before I forget myself completely. The ride back to town was quieter, both of them lost in thoughts of what had passed between them and what might come next. As they approached Riverspend, Vincent broke the silence. School starts soon, Monday, she confirmed. I'm nervous but excited too. You'll be wonderful. His confidence in her was unwavering. Those children are lucky to have you. At Mrs. Henderson's gate, Vincent helped Bethany dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. When can I see you again? I'll be busy with school this week, she said reluctantly. But perhaps Sunday, after church, he nodded. Sunday it is, I'll be at services, then we can have dinner together. Their goodbye kiss was brief but full of promise, a pledge of things to come. The first day of school arrived bright and clear. Bethany stood at the schoolhouse door, greeting each child by name as they entered. 22 students in all, ranging from 6-year-old Tommy Miller, who could barely sit still long enough to write his name, to 16-year-old Sarah Jenkins, who confided that she hoped to attend a women's college back east someday. As she rang the bell to start the day, Bethany felt a surge of joy. This was where she belonged, sharing knowledge, guiding young minds, building the future one lesson at a time. The silence that had protected her for so long was now fully broken, replaced by the confident voice of a teacher in her element. The week passed in a blur of lessons, recitations, and getting to know her students. Each evening, Bethany returned to Mrs. Henderson's tired but fulfilled, already planning the next day's activities. On Wednesday, a package arrived for her, a dozen new books for the school library, with a note in Vincent's bold handwriting, for your students, and for their exceptional teacher. The gesture touched her deeply, not just for the generosity, but for the thought behind it. Vincent understood what mattered to her. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. When Vincent met her after church services, the smile that lit his face at the sight of her sent warmth coursing through Bethany's veins. You look beautiful, he said, offering his arm to escort her to the hotel restaurant. Over dinner, Bethany shared stories from her first week of teaching Tommy Miller's unexpected aptitude for arithmetic, Sarah Jenkins' impressive essay on the Constitution, the younger children's delight in the new books Vincent had sent. You love it, he observed, watching her animated descriptions with evident pleasure. I do, she admitted. More than I remembered. It shows. He reached across the table to take her hand. Your whole face lights up when you talk about your students. After dinner, they walked through town as the sun began to set, eventually finding themselves on a small bridge over the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse. I have something to ask you, Vincent said as they leaned against the railing, watching the water flow beneath them. Bethany's heart quickened. Yes, there's a harvest dance next Saturday, town tradition. He looked uncharacteristically nervous. Would you do me the honor of attending with me? She laughed softly, relief and disappointment mingling. For a moment, she thought he might be asking a different question entirely. I'd love to, Vincent. Good. He hesitated. There's one more thing. What is it? The dance is also when folks around here tend to make announcements, engagements mainly. He turned to face her fully. I know it's soon, too soon by most standards, but Bethany, I've never been more certain of anything in my life, her breath caught as he took both her hands in his. I love you, he said simply. I think I started falling for you that first day at the creek when you were so fiercely silent but your eyes spoke volumes. He squeezed her hands gently. I don't want to rush you. If you need more time, I understand, but I want you to know where I stand. Tears welled in Bethany's eyes. Vincent Reeves, are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking if I might ask you, he clarified with a small smile. At the dance, properly, with a ring and everything. Joy bubbled up within her, bright and effervescent. And if I said yes now, what then? Hope blazed in his eyes. Then I'd be the happiest man in Montana Territory, or anywhere else for that matter. Bethany stepped closer, sliding her hands up to his shoulders. Then yes, Vincent, the answer is yes. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet as he claimed her lips in a kiss that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. When he finally set her down, they were both breathless. I love you, she whispered against his mouth. I think I have since you paid my debt without asking anything in return, since you respected my silence when no one else did. Vincent pressed his forehead to hers. I will always respect you, Bethany. Your thoughts, your wishes, your dreams, that's my promise to you. The week leading up to the harvest dance passed in a haze of happiness for Bethany. Her students noticed her buoyant mood, and several of the older girls exchanged knowing glances when Vincent stopped by the schoolhouse one afternoon to repair a loose floorboard. Mrs. Henderson helped Bethany prepare for the dance, lending her a lovely shawl that complemented her best dress. Something tells me this will be a special night for you, the older woman said with a wink. I think it will, Bethany agreed, unable to contain her smile. The town hall was transformed for the occasion. Autumn leaves and late blooming wildflowers decorated the walls. Tables laden with food lined one side of the room, and a small band of local musicians played lively tunes that had couples already dancing when Vincent and Bethany arrived. You look stunning, Vincent murmured as he helped her with her shawl. He himself was dressed in his best, a proper suit rather than his usual trail clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, his face cleanly shaven. The evening progressed like something from a dream. They danced, they ate, they talked with neighbors and friends. Bethany watched Vincent interact with the townspeople, noting the respect they showed him and the genuine warmth he extended in return. He's a good man, Mayor Whitaker commented, appearing at Bethany's side as she watched Vincent across the room. One of the best in these parts. I know, she replied simply. The mayor patted her hand. Glad you came to Riverspend, Miss Harlow. You've been good for our children, and for him. With a knowing nod, he moved away. As the evening neared its conclusion, Mayor Whitaker called for everyone's attention. As is our tradition, the harvest dance is a time for announcements and celebrations, he declared. Do we have any to share tonight? Vincent took Bethany's hand, leading her forward. A murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd. I have an announcement, Vincent said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. He turned to face Bethany, taking both her hands in his. When I met this woman, she wasn't speaking to anyone. Life had taught her that silence was safer than words. Bethany felt tears threatening at the tenderness in his voice. But her silence spoke volumes to me, he continued. Her courage, her strength, her dignity, all there in her eyes, in her bearing, in the way she faced each day despite what she'd endured. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Bethany Harlow, you've given me the greatest gift by breaking your silence, by sharing your voice and your heart with me. Sinking to one knee, he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Through tears of joy, Bethany nodded. Yes, she said clearly, her voice strong and sure. Yes, Vincent Reeves, I will marry you. The room erupted in cheers and applause as Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, lifting her off her feet once more as their friends and neighbors celebrated around them. Later, as they stood under the stars outside the town hall, Vincent held Bethany close. Happy? He asked, his lips brushing her temple. More than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. When I came west, I thought my life was over. Now I know it was just beginning. Our life, he corrected gently. Together. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church, with the entire town in attendance. Bethany wore a new dress of ivory satin that Mrs. Henderson and several other ladies had helped her make. Vincent stood tall and proud in a new suit, Abe at his side as best man. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. When it came time for their vows, Bethany's voice rang out clear and true as she promised to love, honor, and cherish Vincent for all her days. His own vows were equally heartfelt, his eyes never leaving hers as he pledged his life and love to her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." As Vincent's lips met hers, sealing their union, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that this was a kiss she would never regret, the first of thousands they would share in the life they were building together. Their wedding night was spent at Vincent's ranch, now their ranch. Abe had tactfully arranged to stay in town, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first night as husband and wife. Vincent carried Bethany over the threshold of the cabin, which had been transformed in her absence. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the bed, and wildflowers filled vases on every surface. "Abe helped," Vincent admitted sheepishly. "Wanted it to be special for you." "It's perfect," Bethany assured him, touched by the effort they had made. What followed was a night of tender discovery, of passion and gentleness, of two people learning each other in the most intimate ways. Vincent's reverent touch healed the last of Bethany's old wounds, replacing painful memories with new ones of pleasure and connection. In the soft light of dawn, they lay entwined beneath the quilt, Bethany's head resting on Vincent's chest as he stroked her hair. "No regrets?" he asked softly. She raised her head to look at him, love swelling in her heart at the sight of his dear face. "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one." His answering smile was all the confirmation she needed that she had found her true home, not in a place, but in a person. In this man who had respected her silence and who now cherished her voice. In this love that had transformed her from a woman afraid to speak into one unafraid, to shout her joy to the heavens. As the years passed, Bethany continued teaching in Riversbend while helping Vincent build their ranch into one of the most successful in the territory. Their cabin expanded into a proper house, with rooms enough for the children who eventually joined their family, first a son they named William after Vincent's father, then twin daughters, Caroline and Margaret. Each night, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset over their land, Bethany would often think back to that day at the creek when a quiet cowboy had respected her silence. How that small act of kindness had changed the course of her life, leading her to love, to family, to a happiness she had once thought impossible. And each night, Vincent would take her hand, press a kiss to her palm, and remind her in 1,000 unspoken ways that some things were worth waiting for, worth fighting for. That love, once found, was a treasure beyond price. That two broken people could heal each other and create something beautiful and lasting in the process. In the silence between their words, in the space between their heartbeats, lay the truth they both knew, that their love story, unexpected and unlikely as it had been, was the greatest blessing either of them had ever known. And neither of them would change a single moment of the journey that had brought them together.